Hey everybody, it's Ruby here today, and I thought that I would do an April wrap-up and a March to be read. I didn't read that many books in April, and I'm not planning to read that many books in May, so I thought that I would just kind of put this all in one video, and I'll just do this in chronological order. So the first book that I finished in April was The Wisdom of Psychopaths by Kevin Dutton. He actually teaches social psychology at the University of Cambridge, and he sort of created a popular science book about psychopaths and how they fit into general society and whether or not they are useful for evolution. Now, I did do a book review in my blog, which I'll link down below, so I won't get too much into it, but I thought that this was fairly interesting. There were a lot of studies that I hadn't known before, and I generally learned a lot about psychopaths and sort of the misconceptions we have about them. However, it was a little bit disorienting reading it because there wasn't a clear thesis and there wasn't sort of a clear point to the different chapters. You'd sort of refer back to chapters, but you'd kind of forget halfway through, but there wouldn't really be a main point at the end. So I was able to glean a lot of information from this, but I didn't really overall understand what his point was. It's also a fairly scientific book. He includes a lot of psychological jargon and other sorts of measurements. He does include footnotes, but it was definitely more psychological than previous pop science books that I'd read, so just keep that in mind if you do want to read this. The second book that I read was Losing It: How We Popped Our Chair in the Last 80 Years by Kate Monroe. I also did a book review on this in one of my previous videos, which I'll also link down below, but I liked this quite a bit. It's about basically anecdotal evidence as to people's different thoughts on virginity and sort of how they've lost them, and the sort of intersection between like disability, orientation, and sort of time periods. I quite liked this because there wasn't a lot of assumptions going along with it. The person who was writing it hadn't really come into the sort of project with any sort of agenda. So I thought it was a fairly well done book about a sensitive topic, and I would definitely recommend this one. Lastly, for what I had read, I had actually hauled this as well, and that is The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Century 2009. This is the last issue of The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. It is not the very last or the ending, I don't believe, of the series, but it is definitely the last one to be published. And because I had read this and hadn't quite really known what was going on, I started to reread the series again. So I read the first and second volume of The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and I'm currently on 1910 of this same series as well. And I hope to do a video entirely devoted to Alan Moore because I have read a couple of his stories and I thought that I would share my thoughts on that, so I will be putting that into a different video. If, however, you do not want to wait for that video, this is a league of literary characters of the Victorian age. So you have Alan Quatermain, the Invisible Man, Nemo, Jekyll and Hyde, and Wilhelmina Murray, I think. And they end up fighting a lot of H.G. Wells characters and later on Harry Potter characters and things like that. I actually have to keep a Wikipedia article open so that I can look up the different names because unfortunately I haven't read all of the Victorian stories to ever be published. So that is everything for my April wrap-up, and this is what I will be reading in May. So like I've said in a lot of previous videos, I am going to be visiting England for the entire month of May, so you might actually be watching this while I'm over there. And so I picked a lot of books that I knew that I would like or that I wouldn't have to use too much brain power to read. Part of this is because I get fairly stressed out in airports. I find that I constantly have to keep one eye on sort of the boarding and to listen to announcements and to generally know when my plane is taking off. And then once I'm actually on the plane, I'm constantly thinking about layovers and my transfer times, and so I find that I can't really tend to focus on movies or any complicated books. But I would like to read on the plane, especially so that I can do a couple of videos on these books. And so, like I said before, I picked books that I thought I would like. So this is The Reader by Bernhard Schlick. I actually put this in my to be read pile, so I'm definitely starting to read my summer reads. I had watched the movie with Ralph Fiennes and Kate Winslet, and I had quite liked this, and so I pursued it and discovered that it was actually a book as well. It's about a young boy in Germany who falls in love with an older woman, and he starts to read to her. And later you find out why he has to read to her and her past history. So I find this quite interesting. These were also on my to be read pile, or at least one of them was, and I was able to pick up the other one, and that is The Girl Who Played with Fire and The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest by Stieg Larsson. I had read the first one actually when I had gone to England last year, and I had quite liked them. The first chapter sort of surprised me. I wasn't really sure what this book was about, but I read further and was absolutely captivated by them, so I figured that both of these will occupy a large amount of the time on the plane, and I should get a lot of enjoyment out of these. I tried to think of how to summarize them, and for anybody who hasn't watched any of the movies or read any of the books, it can be a little bit complicated to try and explain. These two are the second and third in the trilogy. I had read the first one in England, and for anybody who doesn't know about the previous book, it is about Lisbeth Salander and Michael Bloomfist. Michael is recruited to figure out the mystery of a missing or murdered girl, and he meets Lisbeth along the way, who is a computer hacker, and together they are able to solve the mystery and a little romance starts to happen. And these ones, it looks like the two of them kind of worked apart, but I mean, it is a book, so obviously they'll probably get back together. There's a lot of action, mystery, and romance in them, and they have been best sellers, so I thought that would be pretty interesting. I also love Lisbeth's character. She's a little bit aspy, I guess, and a little bit nerdy, but she definitely doesn't take shit from anybody, and is definitely a pretty strong character. And the last is Before Watchmen. I didn't actually add this to my to be read pile, which I should have, because I got this at Christmas. My father bought this for me. I'm an absolutely huge fan of Alan Moore, as I've said before, but I was unsure about this because this is based on his previous work, Watchmen, but it isn't actually written by him. It has gotten some pretty good reviews, I believe, so it should be quite interesting. It is about the previous generation of superheroes that he writes about, and then their general exploits. I don't know the actual plot of it, but it is a graphic novel, so I'm pretty sure it's going to be a lot of action and adventure. So that is everything. You've seen what I've read, and you see what I am going to be reading. Hopefully I will be reading all of them. I swear I will. And I will talk to you guys later.